Hi, this is Bharti and welcome to another episode of TFR Insights. And today we have with us Seth Earley, author of the AI-powered enterprise and CEO of Earley Information Science, or EIS. Seth, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You have done so much work in this space. A little disclosure, I am also a science fiction writer. I have not written for a very long time, but so AI and ML has a totally different meaning for me. You know how science fiction looks at it, but the kind of science AI we see in science fiction is different from the real world. The closest interaction we have had is with Siri or Alexa, or you can go at IBM Watson, but a lot of work is going on in this space. But mostly what we do see is on the consumer side, so you have written a book about enterprise. So what I want to understand from you is that how different is the AI in enterprise world versus the consumer world?
Sure. So what's interesting about our world when it comes to AI is there's a lot of AI that's already being used in various applications, but we just don't call it AI. AI has become very hyped over the last several years. There have been some great advancements in both processing power and the algorithms themselves and the sources of data. But AI is something that has been around. AI and machine learning have been around for 30 years and have gone through various incarnations and iterations. I like to tell the story that one of the first applications of AI was actually word processing, believe it or not. It was the embodiment of human knowledge and expertise in a program, and that's how it was defined. But we don't call it AI. We don't say, I'm going to use AI to create this report, right? We're using word processing. And there was an instructor, a machine learning and AI professor at MIT who said, at the time, AI by definition doesn't work. Because as soon as it works, we call it something else. And voice recognition, spell check, these are all implementations of AI. In fact, search algorithms have always used machine learning and feedback loops in order to create search indexes. So it's under the covers and it's been there. Now, what's happened over the last several years is we've had this explosion of consumer-facing applications, and then a lot of hype around things like Watson and the Jeopardy win and all of that. And what that did was it opened up a world of AI for what are called cognitive applications. And the cognitive applications or cognitive computing are really systems and applications that are meant to reduce the cognitive load on the human. So make it easier for people to interact with technology, such as through conversational interactions. But that's really what technology has always tried to do. It's always sought to reduce the load on the human and make it easier for people to interact with information. This is an evolution. This is the next step. And what's happening internally in organizations is they've gone through a lot of poorly conceived and not very effective projects. They've spent a lot of money on moonshot AI projects, curing cancer at MD Anderson Cancer Center, or building virtual assistants for Vodafone that cost millions and millions of dollars. Now, some of those have been successful, some of those have not been successful. But what we're seeing is a number of very small incremental improvements in enterprise applications where the AI is either subsumed into the system itself, like Salesforce.com has AI built into lead scoring, for example, and other types of applications like that. But we've also seen very focused applications on helping to provide assistance, these helper bots for call centers, for support desks, for employees who need to get answers very quickly. And they're using that type of virtual assistant to provide those answers. So we're seeing this evolution in a lot of different areas. We're seeing very focused applications. We're seeing some of the more cognitive applications. But AI has been around for a very long time. And machine learning, which is an extension of analytics and advanced analytics, has been used in financial services for decades. So it's really an evolution of things that have already been happening, with some large scale examples, Siri and Watson and Amazon Alexa and so on.
So when we talk about enterprise world, I would like to kind of side example of some there are some spaces like medical healthcare, for example, especially in the after this COVID-19 world, where going physically to a place becomes hard. So patients are relying more and more on voice activated, voice virtual assistant, where voice plays a big role, and natural language, that also becomes very critical, where you have to have empathy. You need to know who are talking to, banking, financial, a lot of things are going on. So do you think that COVID-19 will change? I mean, it will not change the course, but it may accelerate the adoption of AI and ML. What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need to provide additional support and capabilities for remote workers. And there's lots of different applications for AI, not only in analyzing the data about the actual infection and treatments and so on. One of our partners, data.world, is actually the largest host of COVID-19 research and clinical data in the world. And so, but when it comes to corporate applications, people have been scrambling. They've been accelerating things that would have taken 6 months into 2 weeks. One of our professional services clients mentioned that the other day. But they're also cutting corners because they're trying to push this stuff out very, very quickly. And it won't be until another 6 months or a year when people start saying, well, wait a minute, we did this and incurred some technological or technical debt because maybe we rushed it out, or we didn't do as much usability testing, or we didn't harmonize the architecture, or do some of the basic, blocking and tackling. But it's definitely pushed organizations to realize that they have a lot of gaps in the ways that their people interact, collaborate, and interact with their information systems. So it's revealing more work to be done and more weaknesses. But right now, everybody's just scrambling to, enable remote workers when they weren't used to that. But the difference, with being remote is you can't walk down the hall or to the next desk or find your buddy or talk it over at lunch and say, hey, where is that report from last quarter? Oh, do you know the solution to this particular problem? All of that serendipitous collaboration doesn't happen the same way. And so we have to enable that with online tools. And then we also have the challenge of making sure that our workers are engaged, because right now they're not tethered by physical location if they're working remotely. And the culture is very different. They're not showing up to an office and seeing their friends. They're doing this online. They're also assembling into different types of work teams. So culture is being impacted. Remote work efficiency is being impacted. The lack of well-constructed and defined knowledge bases. The fact that many systems are disconnected and people have to go to lots of different places. Maybe it wasn't so obvious when people working in the office, but it's much more obvious now. So it's accelerated things, but it's also uncovered a lot of challenges and weaknesses. But there are many different things that AI can do for things like employee retention, improving the employee experience, streamlining their work processes, making knowledge more readily available, and so on. But the problem right now is there was such a rush to do this that people deployed lots of different tools and kind of fragmented things and made things a little bit worse in the short term while they're trying to scramble to adapt.
Excellent. Now, I am also kind of wondering that how much role is open source playing in this acceleration of AI/ML? Because some of these, not only technologies, frameworks, even infrastructure is really, really hard for data science. It's very expensive, but open source has democratized all these things. Whether you look at Microsoft, whether you Google, Amazon, they are offering their own frameworks which are accessible to everybody. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's a wonderful thing, and it really is the democratization of AI. The thing that organizations need to realize is they do not need to compete for the highest end, greatest talent in, AI talent in the world. They say that people who can optimize a neural network, there's a relationship between the number of layers they can optimize and the number of digits in their salary. I don't remember exactly what it was, but some of these are very, very complex and difficult, and tuning the hyperparameters can be more art than science. It takes a lot of experience, but organizations don't need to do that. That is the heavy lifting that the big tech vendors have already made. They've already spent the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of making voice recognition work, for example, or speech recognition work. And so those basic capabilities are in the platforms. And Google and Microsoft and Amazon are doing a very good job of presenting those tools at various levels of sophistication. If you want to build an application at a higher level, a business analyst can do that. If you wanted to get into more detail and nuance and functionality, a programmer can do that. If you want to go a layer deeper, a data scientist can work with those tools. And really at the deepest level, the high-end computer engineering and artificial intelligence and machine learning experts can go into those algorithms. So they've done a really good job of making those things available at various levels. There's a lot of open source. There's hundreds and hundreds of algorithms that are available that people can use. It's really about the business application, the business problem, the configuration, the use cases, and the data and data quality. That's what the real limiting factors are, and that's where the real value is. It's not in trying to reinvent some of these core algorithms. Those algorithms are being further developed and refined by the big vendors and by the open source community. And the applications are being built in such a way that it's really about configuration as opposed to heavy lifting programming. That's what it's about. That's what organizations need to do. They need to focus on their business problem. They need to focus on how they're measuring the results of success. They need to look at very specific processes they're trying to enable and then bring the right types of tools. They don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to some of these core capabilities. And you put it very, very well when you talked about the democratization of AI, because that's what's happening. It's all out there.
And one more thing that has happened with this democratization and open source is that now developers are the king. They bring their own tool into the organizations. It's no longer decision that doesn't come all the way from CEOs and CIOs. Most of the case, CIOs are not aware of all those things. So when it comes to, you touched upon some key points there, but when it comes to AI, ML, and as you also said, that these tools should add some business value to their organization. It's not just tools for the sake of tools. So first of all, how should the C-suite kind of need to know about AI, and what role can they play in this developer is the king word when it comes to implementation of AI throughout their organization?
So there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, executives in the C-suite need to realize that this stuff is not magic, and that if things sound too good to be true, they're not true, right? That's the old saying. If people are overpromising and making huge pronouncements about how this is going to change the business, and don't worry, our tool will do it all, that's vendor hype. That's nonsense, right? It has to be understandable by a business person in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. Don't worry about what's under the covers and in the weeds. You can compare and do pilots and POCs in order to see what's functioning. But the most important thing for the executive suite to understand, and business users to understand, is the nature of the problem they need to impact and to solve. And it can't just be a big, giant, ambiguous digital transformation or we're leveraging AI. It really has to be the blocking and tackling. Who are you trying to impact? What types of information flows? What types of information do you need to make better decisions? What's it going to be worth to get that information? And look at it from that perspective. Look at it from the business perspective. In my book, The AI-Powered Enterprise, I go through all of that blocking and tackling, all of the ways of laying out the use cases, understanding the needs of your users, identifying characteristics of customers that you can cater to, understanding how to manage and govern and measure these things. I like to say I'm a bit of a party pooper because I say there's no magic, and the things that people have to focus on are the day-to-day blocking and tackling of good information and data hygiene. And what's happening is a lot of the AI that we're bringing to the organization is actually trying to make up for her past sins in poor data hygiene, right? Why do we need semantic search? Because people didn't use the same terminology to describe things. They never agreed upon things. Why do we need certain AI tools to help us do better integration? Because we didn't integrate these things in the first place. Or we have brittle integrations and hard-coded things and legacy applications that are disconnected. So this is less about the technology and it's more about the data. It's more about the process. It's more about the business objective and being able to make intentional decisions that are driven by data and that show value. Now, you can do experimentation, right? There may be situations where you just have to make some investments in learning. That's fine. You can do that. But don't expect an ROI from those investigations unless you're really crisp about what you're trying to accomplish. You get agreement and buy-in from the business. You get agreement and buy-in from somebody from finance who will justify and stand behind the measures of the benefit. That's a great thing to do, is bring finance into your ROI calculations at the very, very beginning so they believe it. And it's really about, again, it's not about taking an entire job and trying to turn it over to AI or an entire function. It's really looking at focused interventions. Tom Davenport, who wrote my foreword to the book, wrote a book called The AI Advantage. And what it's doing, what he talked about was the fact that organizations that are successful with AI are doing lots of incremental things that add up to a major transformation, but they don't start off saying this is going to be a major transformation. It can be part of a big roadmap, but it's really understanding the processes. It's really understanding the data sources. It's really understanding the needs of your users, whether those are customers or employees. And I like to say, you can't automate a mess, and you can't automate something you don't understand. If people don't understand the process, the AI is not going to fix it. So it's really getting your data house in order. It's really getting clear about business objectives, about measures, a lot of the basic blocking and tackling that has to be done for any project. And AI has certain nuances. And again, I describe all of those in the book.
Since you mentioned your book, so there is one chapter that is really interesting, and that is the subtitle is that harness the power of ontology to make your business smarter, faster, and more profitable. I'm curious, what is ontology doing here in their book about AI?
So an ontology is really a representation of all of the things that are important to the organization. People are familiar with metadata structures and master data and taxonomies. And the interesting thing about approaching your information problems in your business from a master data perspective is you're automatically jumping into the deepest level of data representation, whereas you have to start at a conceptual level, a business level. And what an ontology does is it takes all the different categorization systems and processes. So all the different ways of managing things, your products, your product hierarchy, your solutions, your content types, your document types, people roles, processes, tasks, solutions, all of these different elements that need to be categorized and organized, but it's also the relationships between them. So if you have products and you have services, maybe you have services for a product. If you have a problem and a solution, and you have solutions to the problem, right? You have solution bundles. You have ways of answering questions that are based on the relationship of things that are conceptual. And what happens is when you take all those taxonomies, and there's thesaurus structures, which is, when you use different terms to mean the same thing, you have to map them together. Like SOW is the same as proposal, is the same as statement of work. All those things need to be reconciled. And so the ontology is that representation of that knowledge domain. And it takes into consideration all of the different naming conventions and all of the different organizing principles, and then uses that as a source of master data or reference data for your AI. It gets expressed as things like knowledge graphs and graph data. It can be expressed in master data. It can be expressed in various aspects of the user experience, customer attributes. It really becomes that framework for establishing a way of organizing information across the enterprise. It's always changing, it's always living, it's always evolving. It's taxonomies and the relationship. So for insurance company, you have risks and you have regions and you have risks in regions. For a life sciences firm, you have generic drugs and brand names and mechanisms of action and chemical pathways and diseases and indications and treatments and so on. All of those concepts and all the terms that go with them go into the ontology. And ontologies, again, become the source of truth. They become the knowledge scaffolding. They become the soul of the business, because it embodies knowledge of relationships and solutions and your products and your services and your people. And it is the thing that provides the knowledge to the AI. We can also take chatbots and we can take the dialogues and the entities and we can put those into an ontology, so we can reuse them and make chatbots more scalable, more portable, more reusable. So the ontology is really this framework that starts at the level of business concepts, but it goes down into the level of detail around terminology. And again, people hear of knowledge graphs and graph data. That is one of the expressions of the ontology. The ontology is absolutely necessary for AI projects and for cognitive assistance. One of our manufacturing clients said that they had hundreds of thousands of pieces of orphan data. One of the things that Tom Davenport argued with me a little bit about was whether you really need an ontology for machine learning, because you can have a machine vision program that could identify part defects, for example. It doesn't need an ontology. That's fine, but what do you do with the results? What part? What manufacturing process? What's the procedure? Who's going to do something about it? How do you contextualize it? How do you act on it? So even if your actual machine learning program doesn't need reference data, you need this scaffolding to apply it, to be able to act on the insights. So that's why people call it a knowledge architecture as well. Many times that stops organizations from deploying AI. And they also have problems with the quality of production data versus the quality of proof of concept or pilot data. So the ontology helps to reconcile and manage the data, the concepts, the hierarchies, and really any of the knowledge architecture and the value, the soul of the business that's the reference data for and master data for AI, essentially.
So, Seth, first of all, thanks for this great discussion. Now, your book is out. So I have two questions for you. Number one is, what is the best tip you have for readers of the book to not only consume it in the best way, but also kind of actually benefit from it? So if you have any trick up your sleeve, this is the best way to go through the book. And second is, what is the best way to get the book?
So every chapter has a list of bulleted takeaways at the end. And even if you just read the first page and the takeaways of every chapter, that's a good start. But I've seen people underline it, dog ear it, take notes in it. It's almost like it's very dense. I think you need to pull away the important points and use that as a holistic framework for your leadership. All this has to get to the C-suite. You need to understand this is how you do it. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback from practitioners in the industry. Pete Johnson from MetLife, who is their SVP and senior fellow, been in AI for 37 years said, this is the recipe. This is the way to do it. So I've gotten a lot of good feedback, and I think it's taking those ideas and translating it into something that you can help your leadership understand. And it does take some work. There's, I was talking to one client and they said, this just sounds like a lot of hard work. I'm like, yeah, it is. There's no free lunch. Work is hard. and simplicity, it takes a lot of complexity behind the scenes to make something simple, right? People say, it has to be simpler. Well, getting to simple can be complex. So you just have to do the blocking and tackling.
Well, very well said, Seth. Thank you so much for taking time out today and talking to me about it, not only your book, but also what role is AI playing in the enterprise. And actually, I want to talk to you again, as I said. So thank you for time, and let's make some time again for future discussion. Thank you.
Sounds great. I'd be happy to join anytime. This is a lot of fun.